About a year ago, just before Obama left office in 2016, he signed what's known to many people as the Dark Act. You see, what happened is Vermont was trying to push to label GMOs, and basically, Obama signed a law basically forbidding states from being able to label GMOs. And so this came after California tried, and then Monsanto put out a big PR campaign to fight the labeling of GMOs. Then Vermont tried. And the fact that Obama fought against the labeling of GMOs in Vermont, it contradicts his 2007 promise to label GMOs.
Here's what I'll do as president. I'll immediately implement country of origin labeling because Americans should know where their food comes from. We'll let folks know whether their food has been genetically modified because Americans should know what they're buying.
Some countries have already banned GMOs, while other countries have labeled GMOs. But here in America, the land of the free, our country has basically banned the labeling of GMOs. You see how backwards we are? It's because Monsanto is a U.S. company. The way that Monsanto got their GMOs passed was with GRAS status, G-R-A-S, which stands for Generally Regarded as Safe. How did they do that? Michael Taylor, who was the head of the FDA, gave them GRAS status. Michael Taylor is the former attorney for Monsanto, so he's went back and forth from his career from the FDA to Monsanto and back. He's even worked for the USDA. So this guy plays both sides of the fence. And, it's a really important issue. If you're watching this, I'm sure you're already well aware of a lot of the problems with GMO, so I won't get into that. I just want to make you aware that our government, basically this is a good example of the government lying. This is a good example of the government not following through with their campaign promises. We elect people on their campaign and then they don't follow through with it. So Trump, message to you, hey, help us out here. If you're really for the people want GMOs labeled. And clearly Obama isn't working for the people. He's working for these big corporations. So let me go over a few notable quotes from this article, and I'll link to this article below. But it basically said that President Obama recently ignored 250,000 petitioners and signed into law Senate Bill 764, known to many as the DARK Act. And DARK stands for, it's an acronym for Deny Americans the Right to Know. This article states that the DARK Act was boiled up by agrochemical industry lobbyists and their allies in Congress to prevent Vermont from becoming the first state in the country to implement a mandatory GMO labeling on food packaging. See, this is a big deal. If they want, the thing is the Monsanto, it's not just Monsanto, but they're by far the leader in this industry. And they want people to believe that this is a noble cause, that this is a good thing, and it's going to help feed the world. Well, if GMOs is a good thing, then they should proudly label them. Everything else that is a good thing that they use to market their own product. But evidently the people haven't been convinced that GMOs is good. And they say that, it's just people just don't understand the science and it's unwarranted concern and all this other stuff. But, it's never been tested. It was given GRAS status. There's no long-term safety testing. There's virtually no testing. They just did it. And, and of course this Senate bill, they tried to pitch it like it was a good thing. That's how they do everything. Usually things are the opposite of what they say. Like the Patriot Act is the opposite of what a Patriot Act is, and so on and so forth. But this is a big deal. We need it to be labeled because if GMOs are labeled, people aren't going to buy them. The reason why it's being sold. So, the reason why there's so many GMOs being sold is because it's not labeled. Most people don't know how to tell what's GMO and what's not. That's why they have the non-GMO um, symbols now, the non-GMO whatever it is on the bags of food. So that's one of the best things to look for is the non-GMO label. Also look for organic, because if it's organic, it's supposed to not be allowed to have any GMOs in there. So that's good to know. But even though it was labeled as something that, like they said, this measure will provide new opportunities for consumers to have access to information about their food. But Professor Laura Murphy, director of the Environmental and Natural Resources Law Clinic at Vermont Law School, observed the new law. In fact, says that it does the opposite of creating consumer transparency for GMO food. Quote, if Congress were really interested in providing consumers with information, it could have adopted Vermont's on-package label that companies are already using across the country, Murphy explained. Instead, Congress created a mechanism for companies to hide behind QR codes and trample on states' efforts to provide their citizens with actual information. The article goes on to state that Monsanto and its GMO pesticide hawking allies have already corrupted the executive branch agencies such as the FDA and the Department of Agriculture with a revolving door enrichment scheme for government officials. That's what I was talking about with Michael Taylor. It says, now they are winning legal claims that federal agencies originally created to protect public health should instead serve as legal shields to protect corporations from any and all public safety regulation by local and state governments. So, that's the big issue here, is that the government is supposed to be for the people, and the people want labeling. But instead of the government helping us get the labeling that we're asking for, they are becoming shields to protect these big corporations, because, of course, the big corporations lobby and offer these people good positions with their companies after they get done working for the companies they're working for. The article says, by persuading compliant members of Congress to overwhelmingly pass the DARK Act, the agrochemical industry has extended the Monsanto doctrine to the legislative branch, securing a seemingly impenetrable fortress around the business of toxic agriculture. It says, in striking down the Vermont law, Congress has made sure that American exceptionalism on behalf of corporate donors against basic consumer rights is a mainstay of U.S. politics. The DARK Act ensures that the United States will not follow the 64 countries around the world that now require plain labeling of GMO food. Quote, what the DARK Act shows us is that multinational corporations are not just lobbying and exercising power. They are literally ruling us, says David Cobb, Outreach Director of Move to Amend. Quote, supermajorities of voters in both parties want to see clear labeling of GMO food, but we, the people, don't control our own government. Our elected representatives don't represent us. Congress has colluded with Monsanto and the agrochemical industry to force down our throats legislation that the American people do not want. Ronnie Cummins, who's a whistleblower of Organic Consumers Association, is also quoted in this article. It's, quote, the bill is a sham, a slap in the face to the 90% of Americans who support labeling, Cummings wrote. It's an attack on states' rights. It's another gift to Monsanto and Big Food. And for anyone who still harbored any doubt, S.764 is proof that our democracy is broken and that our lawmakers answer to corporate America, not to us, the people who elect them. It says it will come as a shock to progressives to learn that as many Democratic senators voted for the DARK Act as those who opposed it. There's a full link to the full roster here, but it does say that Bernie Sanders is the only like major public figure that opposed the bill. And I give Bernie Sanders a hard time, but I'm going to be honest here, and I'm just going to be fair, and mention that he did oppose it. Now, how much of that is just public relations? Maybe he knew it was already going to get passed. They didn't need him. They didn't need his support because it had overwhelming support, which it shouldn't have. And so maybe because he's a public figure, he had to go with what the people wanted, so he can maintain that public image. I'm not saying that's the case. I have no proof of that, but I don't trust Bernie. He gutted the IRS out of the Fed. I mean, not the IRS, but the out of the Fed bill that Ron Paul was fighting so hard for. And just a real quick recap, if you haven't been following, this is a big problem. This is really the crux of the matter, is the Federal Reserve. So the fact that he ruined that, I mean, there's really no excuse for that. Also, Bernie Sanders, a lot of people don't know this, but he's on record saying that he doesn't think a 90% tax is too high. 90% tax, I mean, what is too high then? 91, 92, 99? If you make $1 and you only get to choose how to spend 10 cents of it, and the government takes 90 cents and decides how to spend it, that's not freedom. It's the opposite of freedom. I don't want the government taking my money and doing what it thinks I should do with it. So Sanders, I think, is either really dumb or a fraud. I don't know which one it is, but I'll leave a link to a post that I made about Bernie Sanders, because I know I don't like to pick on him, but I do. It's just because I see a lot of people that are like wanting social justice, a lot of freedom fighters and stuff, like a lot of people that are really on the right. They have the right thing in mind. They are on the right track, and they're being misled by Bernie Sanders. So I point these things out because it's important to note this, because we need those people. We need the Bernie Sanders people on our side fighting for freedom. And they think they're fighting for freedom because Bernie's against the 1%. Bernie is the 1%, So, I'm getting a little bit off topic off this article, but I'm going to get into this because it ties everything together. So, Bernie Sanders is for socialism. And a lot of people think that this whole Monsanto GMO thing is one of the failures of capitalism. I think it's more of a failure of socialism. And I'm going to have a post and maybe even a podcast episode where I explain this in much more detail. But basically, in capitalism, in free market capitalism, it's just voluntary transactions, and each person benefits from the transaction. If I give you $1 for the bread, I value the bread more than the dollar I have. I gain, you gain, each party gains in a voluntary transaction. Otherwise, they wouldn't do it. With socialism, you have the government forcing transactions. Some transactions aren't voluntary. You have the government forcing these people to take some of the money that they made and give it to these people, or pay for something that these people need. And it's supposed to be for the greater good, but it's a form of collectivism. It's a long topic, but basically, GMOs are subsidized. The government pays for GMOs to be farmed. GMOs are sold at a loss, and then the farmers make their profits from the subsidies. That makes GMO crops cheap. Well, then, what does GMOs go towards? Poor quality soda like Coke and stuff like that, processed foods, and meat. That's the three main things in our food chain that GMOs makes. So you're making soda cheap, and fake juices, and you're making meat, the wrong kind of meat. You're making factory farmed animal meat cheap, and processed food. And that's what's making us sick. The government is making junk food cheap, which is making us sick. Whereas if it was on the open market, you know, like it's cheap to feed the animals the GMOs because the GMOs are sold at a loss. But if that weren't the case, maybe, you know, the farmers would let their animals free roam and eat grass, which is better for the environment, which is healthier to eat for us humans. It's a better life for the animals. So it's really a problem with socialism. You know, Bernie wants the problems are socialism, and Bernie wants, you know, in big government, and Bernie wants to fix the problems with more government. It doesn't work that way. It's the opposite of what we need, and it's all tied in together. The reason why GMOs are so successful is because government forces people to pay for them by subsidies and making people cover that with taxes and stuff like that. So anyway, that's pretty much the summary of the post. But again, if you want to read it and look into this, you know, check out the link in the description below. If you like this, hit that thumbs up button. People need to know what the heck is really going on. They need to be able to understand it, because we're not being told the whole story in the media. So subscribe. You know, subscribe to the channel. I've got a lot of great videos coming soon. And if you have any suggestions for future videos, leave a comment below. I check out most of my comments. I reply when I can. And if I see people want me to do a video on a certain topic, I'll do it. So, yeah, I appreciate you watching this, and I hope you stick around and watch my future videos.